to welcome everybody to our presentation this morning. All of you guys over there on the East Coast. A couple little things for everybody here. First off, we do have a new sponsor for our webinars. So again, we'd like to thank that sponsor. It is Seal Aftermarket Products. You can see on your screen you've got a toll-free number and also their web address that you're going to have access to. So if you have any questions about Seal Aftermarket Products, we'd again appreciate you giving those folks a call. And from that point on, we're going to take you through a little bit of house cleaning, or housekeeping, I should say, this morning. A couple things for everybody to be aware of. Now, I just got a screen that just popped up here. Let me get rid of that screen. A couple things to be aware of. First off, on your connection side of the coin, make sure that you are hardwired to your wall socket rather than going through a wireless router. We've had some issues with that. You should have received a handout. So there should have been a link for a handout, and that handout is a PDF format handout. So again, if you're having some issues getting that handout, you can get a hold of the folks there at ATRA. I give you Lance's email address at the top of the screen itself. Again, since it's a PDF handout, we've had some guys ask questions about how to open that. You have to get something like a Adobe program. It is free off the internet itself, Adobe Reader, and you can physically open it, print it, whatever you wanted to do with the handout itself. If you have some questions as we're going through today's presentation, feel free to ask the question itself. We'll try to answer the question as we go through everything here this morning. Bottom line is, get another screen here popping up. Bottom line is we'll try to answer the questions as you go through it. Lance, I think I'm going to have your help on the questions here this morning because my screen's not allowing me to put the questions up here.
Yeah,
so
no
anyhow, so as the question pops up, Lance will ask the question over the display here this morning, and I'll try to answer, or he can try to answer it. Either one of us can as we go through the presentation here this morning. Following our presentation, you're going to find there's going to be a survey. The survey is an automated type survey itself. It should pop up after we're done doing the presentation. Again, we would appreciate your feedback. Obviously, on the survey itself, it helps us make these things a little bit better as we go. We got a lot of stuff planned for you guys here in the future. A couple weeks from now, we're going to be doing the LCT 1000 Gen 2, and then a couple weeks after that, it'll all be the LCT 1000 Generation 3. And then we're going to follow that up with a 722.9 presentation and several other types of Chrysler presentations and so forth as we go through this stuff. So bottom line, guys, is we've got a lot of stuff planned for you in the future. Hopefully you're enjoying the webinars. Hopefully they're helping you out a little bit. And again, we'd love to hear back about different types of webinars that you guys would like to see presented for you here in the future. So with that said, let's take a look at the 68 RFE. We've got a lot of material to go through today. Going to be kind of an introduction to the 68 RFE. Here sometime probably around the September time frame, it looks like we'll be doing a 68 RFE update class as a webinar. So we'll talk about product issues and so forth at that time. As most of you guys are aware, the 68 RFE itself is the baseline 4-speed truck transmission that you're seeing out in the industry today. It's been around for a few years. It's a replacement for the 48 RE transmission itself. Been a pretty good unit. We've had some shaft issues and so forth with it, a few clutch issues, but for the most part, it's a pretty trouble-free unit. Now, most of you guys understand the correlation of how this transmission came to be. This transmission itself was basically the brother of the 45 RFE or the 545 RFE. And remember, the 545 RFE was basically the cousin of the 41 TE transmission. So the old 604, all the features and functions that you had on it were transferred over to the 45 RFE and the 545 RFE. So anything that you learned about the 604 years ago pretty well applies to those transmissions. Obviously, the parts are different sizes, and you got a front-wheel drive versus a rear-wheel drive. But when it comes to the electronic control system and the layout of the components and so forth, they're very, very similar. Well, the same thing you can hold true here when you start looking at the 68 RFE. If you took a 45 RFE or a 545 RFE, put it on steroids, you'd have a 68 RFE. So my whole point to you guys is the things that you've learned about the 45 RFE and the 545 RFE in years past, you can apply to the 68 RFE. When we're looking at the 68 RFE itself, we give you some information as far as what the electronics do in that transmission itself. As you can see, we got adaptive controls on this transmission. Again, very similar to what you had with the 45 RFE, 545 RFEs. Electronic control for shifting, whether it's line pressure control, shift control, or obviously TCC. They copied from the 545 RFE the pump design. So you've got a dual stage transmission pump that's used in this transmission. So that basically means there's two separate pumping pockets within the transmission pump assembly itself. So the primary side of the pump itself does the majority of the work. The secondary side is bypassed if you're in low volume conditions, but if you need higher volume, then the secondary, of course, kicks in. The torque converter dampener itself, as you can see, is a high travel dampener. They basically slip the converter pretty heavily as the converter comes in. That's the reason for this high dampener travel. One piece, obviously case, again, they're trying to get rid of NVH, which is noise, vibration, and harshness issues. Dual filters to protect the transmission, and of course, independent lubrication and cooler circuits. When you look at the comparisons of these transmissions, we're going to spend a little bit of time today comparing the 45, 545 versus the 68. And the reason we're doing that is because of a couple reasons, or a couple things. One reason we're doing it is because there's familiarity with the 545 and the 45 RFEs. Most of you guys know those transmissions like you know the back of your hands. Guys are just now starting to get into the 68 RFEs, so they're not as familiar and a little bit intimidated by getting into something they've never done before. So if we look at these transmissions, you're going to find they're extremely similar. As I told you, this is basically the big brother of the 545, 45 version transmission. As you can see, we've got the same basic clutch layout. The ratios are a little bit different because the planetaries are a little bit different, but for the most part, the power flow is going to be exactly the same, other than default gears for this transmission. As you can see, the 45 and the 545, they default during fail-safe to third gear. This transmission fail-safes to fourth gear with this box. So a little bit difference there, a little bit of difference in ratios because, of course, the planetaries are going to be totally different in this transmission. The layout of the planetaries, what they look like and so forth, are a little bit different. One's got a 5-pinion planetary, and the other's got a 6-pinion, and so forth. Like any other Chrysler transmission, these transmissions are fairly sensitive to fluid fill and, of course, the fluid type. So what we're telling you is to make sure that you have some opportunity to check the fluid temperature prior to checking your fluid level. As you can see, the chart that I've given you shows you what should happen to the dipstick level itself as you change fluid temperature. So again, to make sure that you are at the correct level, use your scan tool, use your onboard data displays if it's a fancier rig with that, or if in fact you don't have access to either one of those because it's just a quickie kind of thing, shoot your pan with a temp gun so that you get an idea of where that fluid level is supposed to be. So as you can see, it's going to vary dramatically on the dipstick itself. Fluid change with a filter is about 5 quarts. Complete overhaul, as you can see, is about 12 quarts of oil. Like all the other Chrysler transmissions that are out there today, the fluid that's required for this transmission is Mopar ATF Plus 4. There are several companies that are basically rebadging the ATF Plus 4. If you're to talk to the Chrysler engineers, they will tell you that there is a difference in those fluid qualities. Again, we don't know if there is or not. They are making it under the Chrysler patent, so I can't imagine there's a huge difference there. But the bottom line is Chrysler says only use their fluid. Again, I don't know if that's a realistic expectation on anybody's part, but you need to make sure that you are using a version of ATF Plus 4, no matter whose brand of fluid you're actually using. Like the 545 RFEs and 45 RFEs, you're going to have some pressure taps here that you're going to have the abilities to take a look at. So As you can see, we're simply showing you where your line pressure transducer is actually at. You're showing obviously your cooler lines, your dampener apply, and dampener release. In other words, your converter apply, converter release. Bottom line is you're going to have some special tools to do some of the work here on this. We're going to show you those tools here in just a second. Just be aware that the processes and procedures that we taught you years ago about the 545 and the 45 RFEs, as far as checking the fluids are concerned, fluid pressures, are going to be the same in this transmission itself. You will have quick learn capabilities with this trans. And in fact, you've got accelerated quick learn capabilities, something beyond what you've had to some of the other transmissions. Now again, very similar to the 545 transmission, you're not going to have a overall quick learn that you can do, but you're going to have the abilities to individualize gear shift issues, which is a heck of a neat idea on Chrysler's part. So bottom line here, guys, is the quick learn, we're showing you you'd want to do a quick learn basically any time you did anything to the transmission that could affect shift feel or shift quality. So you replace the transmission, you replace the TCM, you reprogram the TCM, you replace the solenoid pack, you replace something inside the transmission, whether that's the valve body or the clutch pack itself. You basically did something service-wise that could affect the shift quality of this trans. At that point, you need to make sure that you redo the quick learn. We're giving you some scenarios here of making sure that you're within these parameters in order for the quick learn to function. If you, in turn, are not within the parameters we're listing right there, in other words, you don't have DTC set, you got to have the brakes applied and so forth, quick learn will not function with your scan tool. So make sure that you follow the criteria that we're laying out right there on your page in order to get the quick learn to function on your scanner. When it comes to the RFE transmissions, they've got a neat feature. And that feature itself is to allow you to individualize shift quality to smooth out different shifts that you're having troubles with. So let's say, for example, that we had a problem with the 5-6 shift. Well, there will be an individualized quick learn process that you can conduct to allow you to fine-tune just that 5-6 shift or just the 4-3 down shift, whatever it is you need to do, which is a heck of a neat idea. I wish every manufacturer out there had this feature, because a lot of times you're dealing with just a specific shift that you're having issues with. And so the RFE families, whether we're talking about the 45, 545s, or the 68s, all have this function. So again, neat little feature, again, right on your scan tool. And again, if you don't have it on your scan tool, you're going to want to talk to your scan tool company, because it is on the factory scan tools. Just like we talked about with the Allisons, we talked about with 4L80Es and so forth through the years, this transmission has some different shift schedules based on transmission temperature. This particular feature has caused us some headaches at ATRA because guys did not know out there in the field that the transmission will shift differently based on whatever your fluid temperature is. So we're showing you the chart. This is actually the chart that came from Chrysler Engineering about what the shift should be like based on what your actual fluid temperature is. So our whole point is, before you start condemning the transmission itself for a product issue, make sure that you look at your temperatures and then pull this chart out to see if in fact it is really a normal condition. So in other words, my point is, if the transmission is overheating, as you can see on the bottom of the screen, it's going to delay the 2-3 shifts, it's going to delay the 3-4 up shifts, it's going to do different things to obviously converter clutch and so forth. So my point is to make sure that you're not trying to fix something that's not broke. Pull this chart up. This is the only place you're going to find this chart. This is their engineering chart. They've got their lookup tables for their calibration. So bottom line is, pull up this chart, make sure that it is really an abnormal condition that you're trying to work on, because again, if it's not broke, you can't fix it. When it comes to the diagnostic tools, again, we're going to be using the same exact diagnostic tools that we came out with, or what Chrysler came out with for the 45 and the 545 RFEs. So in this instance, you're going to have obviously a scan tool. Chrysler's got a couple different versions of them. The older handheld scan tool and their star testers you can see over here on the right-hand side. And the two tools are on the bottom of the screen are actually pretty cool tools. They were introduced with the 45 RFEs. The one on the left is a simulator. Heck of a neat tool. And that same simulator will work with the 68 RFE. So that transmission tool will interchange between those different versions of transmissions. So basically what this does is this replaces your controller. So you can go to eBay and see if you can find one of these used. Very good chance you will at a reasonable price. And bottom line is that tool on the left-hand lower portion of the screen, the 8888 part number that you've got right there, that Miller Special tool, that actually replaces your controller. So you can actually run the transmission right off of that test box. The tool on the right-hand side is a breakout box. And it comes with an adapter so that you can plug into the transmission harness itself and do pin-out voltage checks. These transmissions have extremely small terminals. And Chrysler was very concerned with having those terminals damaged. So they basically came out with a tool to allow you to do pin-out checks so that you would not damage, obviously, the terminals. So that's the tool that we're talking about. Again, it's going to interchange between the two different transmissions. Now, when it comes to the rebuild side of this transmission itself, it's about as simple as you're going to find. As far as in-play measurements are concerned, you'll have two in-play adjustments. We're showing you where the shims are at. Your front in-play is 20 to 29 thousandths. Your rear in-play is 10 to 20 thousandths of an inch. So again, you're going to have a couple different in-plays that you've got the abilities to do. Again, you're going to see where the shims are at located in the picture itself. All right, so now, we talked a little bit of introduction. One of the things we're going to do today, because the guys are really curious about the differences between the 68 RFE and the 45 RFE, so we're going to do a little bit of introduction into what those differences actually are. Show you some comparisons. Again, they're all in your handout. So every page that I'm showing you here is the same page that you're going to have in your handout. So you can go back later on and look at this and refresh this, obviously, in your mind. The 68 RFE and the 45 RFE have that multi-gear pump assembly, as we talked about. They look very similar to each other. The difference is going to be the physical size of the pumps themselves, the physical size of the gears of the pump. So we're showing you here that both these pumps are hubless designs. So that basically means you don't have a seal in the front of the transmission pump itself. The seal is actually in that cover that goes over top of the pump. So again, very similar to the 45 RFE, other than physically the size of the components themselves. So when we look inside of this transmission pump itself, as you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, you will see the 545 RFE gears. On the right-hand side of the screen, you will see the 68 RFE gears. The 68 RFE has a higher volume output than the 545 and the 45 RFEs. Still uses this dual designed pump assembly, but the bottom line is the output is higher because, again, the clutch components are much larger in diameter. So you're going to have, obviously, to stroke a lot larger piston on your apply of that component. So again, looks very, very similar, but physically they are going to be a little bit different. One of the other things that you'll see different about the pumps themselves is going to be the gears themselves, the inner gear. So the inner gears you can see on the 545 RFE has simply 2 lugs for the converter. The inner gear on the 68 RFE has 4 lugs for the converter itself. So again, a little bit of difference as far as design is concerned, but the functionality of the pump will be basically the same. Now, those of you guys that have been to seminars with me before, we've heard me talk a lot about issues with the pumps themselves and also pump wear. We're showing you the different valves and their layout in the pumps themselves. We're showing you the differences in springs. One of the primary differences in the valving between these two pumps is going to be in the spring tensions. So where we're showing you the 545 RFE spring, that's the bottom spring. The spring that's above that is a picture of the 68 RFE spring, so that you could physically see the differences between those two. So as you can see, the pressure regulator valve spring and the torque converter limit valve spring is a different spring tension on the 68 RFE as it is on the 545 and the 45 RFEs. Now, one thing I should precaution everybody about, we're having lots of pump wear issues, lots of valve wear issues. So do not ignore these valves in this pump. Again, huge amounts of troubles with this. They had some casting issues with materials, and so there's lots and lots of these assemblies out there that have worn valves. So depending on which valve is worn, it's going to determine obviously which symptom you actually develop from that valve being worn. So again, as we get into the update section here in a couple months with you guys on the 68 RFE product issues and update webinar, we're going to be talking about each of these individual valves and what those valves do, as well as obviously what happens when the valves wear out, which valves you need to be paying attention to. But as a general rule, make sure that you check every valve in these pumps. So now we're looking at each individual valve. The valve that we're going to start with is the converter clutch switch valve. This switch valve simply controls whether the converter clutch is on or the converter clutch is off. So bottom line is, if we have a stuck switch valve, you're going to have a problem with the converter clutch not wanting to work correctly or not wanting to release correctly. So again, that's going to be your kind of symptom right there. Just like GM does, you're going to find that Chrysler runs a regulator valve for their TCC. So this is to regulate the oil pressure inside the converter when the converter clutch is turned off. So that valve that you see right there is called the converter clutch regulator control valve, and it basically is nothing more than a regulator valve that regulates the oil pressure as the converter clutch is in the off position. So the whole idea behind this is to limit the amount of oil pressure in the converter housing when the converter is off, to limit the amount of force that's being applied to the crankshaft so that you don't have thrust main issues with the transmission, or I should say with the engine. The other valve that you're going to see inside the pump assembly, one of those valves is called the torque converter limit valve. Again, it's going to limit the amount of pressure that you have inside the converter. Finally, last but not least, we got the pressure regulator valve. Pressure regulator valve, of course, is going to control your mainline pressure. So again, nothing razzle-dazzle about that. And again, I might reiterate, we're having valve wear problems on every one of these valves in this oil pump assembly. So really pay close attention to it. Now, the solenoid block itself, as we're showing you here, very similar to the layout of other solenoid blocks that you guys have seen in other Chrysler transmissions. Again, we're giving you a line pressure resistance of 4.3 ohms. And of course, we're giving you a resistance value of all the other solenoids at 1.9 ohms. And of course, then as you look at the chart, we give you the ons and offs for the different solenoids. Most of these solenoids are pulse width modulated controlled solenoids. So again, we're showing you what's supposed to be on and when it's supposed to be on. Getting into the valve body itself, you're going to find out that you're going to have some accumulators in the valve body. In fact, there are 5 accumulators that you're going to have. A low reverse clutch accumulator, overdrive clutch, underdrive clutch, second clutch, and fourth clutch. Just like we've always done with other transmissions, the accumulators control the aggressiveness of your shift. So the bottom line is nothing razzle-dazzle here. This particular picture shows you that some of them do have an inner spring. Again, nothing razzle-dazzle. Make sure you keep your springs with your particular accumulator so that you know where they go. Separator plates, we do get a lot of questions from guys on separator plates. There is a difference between the 545 separator plate and the 68 RFE separator plate. As you can see, the screwdrivers are pointing at where those differences are going to be. So the 68 RFE does not have the cutout there on the upper right-hand corner. And of course, as you can see, there is a different hole on the lower left-hand corner there that the screwdriver is pointing to. So bottom line is they are a different spacer plate. So make sure you pay attention to that as you're trying to swap out some pieces. Now, when it gets into the main valve body, there's not much to do here in the main valve body. There's not much really going on. You do have a solenoid switch valve in the main valve body. You do have a low reverse clutch switch valve. And we, of course, show you where those switch valves are at in that valve body assembly. The low reverse clutch switch valve, as you can see, is up next to your accumulators. And, of course, the other one is next to your manual valve right there. So pretty limited as far as what the actual valve contents are in the valve body itself. The low reverse clutch switch valve itself, as you can see, allows the low reverse clutch to be operated by either your low reverse clutch converter clutch solenoid or your multi-select solenoid that you're going to have in this transmission. Same exact solenoids that we had with the 545 and the 45 RFEs, and it works exactly the same. Your solenoid switch valve controls your fluid sent to the low reverse solenoid for first gear apply and TCC apply, again, depending on the position of the valve. So again, nothing different than you did with the other transmission itself that you've dealt with for many, many years. When it comes to check balls, we're going to show you a check ball location. Again, make sure you got all the balls where they're supposed to be. So we're showing that there are 7 check balls in here. Again, if you leave some of the balls out, you're going to end up with some bind-ups on shifts. And again, as we go into the diagnostics here a couple months from now, into the product issues, we're going to talk about those check balls and what happens if you leave each of those individual check balls out, so that you'll know what your symptom will actually be. So now let's take a minute and let's do a little bit of hardware comparison. We talked a little bit about the valve bodies. We've talked a little bit about the solenoids. Now let's take a look at the hardware, the big pieces inside this transmission. Of course, the biggest difference you're going to have, as you can see on this particular page, is going to be the case itself and how the case is laid out. Obviously, this is going behind different application vehicles. And as you can see, the 68 RFE, even though the bell housing bolt pattern itself, as you can see, is the same, there is a difference as far as the layout of the case itself is concerned. The hole, obviously, where all the components go in is quite a bit bigger, and the reason for that is obviously the components are quite a bit bigger. So again, we're showing each case there, 68 on the left, 45 RFE on the right. The clutches, you're going to find that some of the clutches are the same clutches that they use in the 545 and the 45 RFEs, but some clutches are different. As you can see here, these clutch layouts that we've got here, the low reverse pack, is a different layout. We're using all single-sided discs on the low reverse pack on the 68 RFE. The 45 RFEs, you can see, they are the conventional style clutch pack. So you got 6 on the left-hand side, or excuse me, on the right-hand side, and you got 14 single-sided pack clutches on the left-hand side right there. The reaction plate, as you can see, is going to be a different reaction plate with the 68 RFE versus the 545 and the 45 RFEs. The reason that's cut out there is so it can fit the ring gear. The ring gear is quite a bit bigger in this transmission itself, so you need to have clearance for that ring gear where that clutch sits down around it. So that's the reason for the cutout there. Overrunning clutch, totally different designed overrunning clutch for the 68 RFE versus the 45 and the 545 RFEs. So again, totally different design, going to be non-interchangeable between the components. So we're showing you the overrun clutch layout itself here. We're telling you how the stack-up should be. We're saying obviously this overrunning clutch should be installed with a step up. And we're showing how it's seated against the low reverse hub itself. Again, just some research information, or I should say some resource information for you, so when you get one of these apart, if you get a question about it, you can physically look at the picture and see how it's actually constructed. This is kind of an interesting comparison here that you're going to be looking at. We're looking at the low and reverse assemblies themselves. As you can see here, the layout of the clutch is a little bit different. We're saying here on the right-hand side on the 545 and the 45 RFEs, the teeth on the 45 RFE overrunning clutch stretch over the reaction plate. There's a snap ring that holds in place with that thing stretched over top of it. But when you in turn look at the other clutch pack, you don't have that snap ring. So bottom line is it's a little bit different as far as layout. So when you get this thing apart, and you've been used to doing a 545 or a 45 RFE, you're not going to have that snap ring to worry about, obviously putting back in there on the 68 RFEs. So now let's take a look at the second clutch piston. Second clutch piston itself, as you can see, is a different height on the 68 RFE versus the 45 and the 545 RFEs. As you can see, they have also made the cutouts different, and they did that intentionally for identification purposes. they didn't want somebody putting the wrong piston in. So they made the cutouts physically different there. So as you can see, the 68 RFE has square cutouts. The 45 and the 548 RFEs have circular cutouts. And there's a 3 millimeter difference between those two pistons, so you certainly could not interchange those, or you certainly would not want to interchange those pistons. The 2-4 clutch assembly, again, as we just talked about, there's a difference as far as those oil grooves are concerned for your identification purposes, and there's a difference as far as the height of those pistons. So again, you're going to want to pay attention to that. The dimensions of those pistons are the same, but the heights are going to be physically different. Now, when it comes to the carriers, it's pretty self-explanatory here on the carriers themselves. Bottom line is you're going to have a lot bigger components on the 68 RFE than you did the 45 or 545 RFEs. Bottom line, guys, is this. 68 RFEs is a 6-pinion carrier. The 45, 545, of course, uses a 5-pinion carrier. And the bearing that you see that's on the back of that carrier assembly is a heavier duty bearing on the 68 RFE. So again, just another example here that you're going to have popping up on your screen, looking at that carrier assembly on the left-hand side, looking at your ring gear here on the right-hand side. Again, physically these parts are bigger than what you had with the 545s and the 45 RFEs. All right, so we looked at the one carrier. Now let's look at the reverse carrier. As you can see, as we talked about earlier, with the other carrier, you have a different number of pinions. Well, in this instance, it's the same way. The 45 RFEs, 545 RFEs all have 4 pinions in that reverse carrier. The 68 RFE, as you can see, has 6 pinions in it. So again, physically a lot larger carrier. The reaction annulus is welded to the carrier assembly, so it does not have a hub like the 45, 545s do. So here's obviously this carrier assembly showing you that that is a 6-pinion carrier versus obviously a 3-pinion carrier on the reaction carrier assembly. So same kind of thing that we just talked about a little bit earlier, physically different parts. Reaction sun gear, this is kind of interesting on this one. First off, as you can see, there is no number 7 bearing. So the bearing that we're showing is a number 7. Bearing itself on the 45 RFE is missing in action on the 68 RFE. So you're going to have one less bearing in this transmission. As you can also see, that sun gear is welded to the 4th clutch hub. So that hub assembly, as you can see, the nice weld there, hooking that sun gear directly to that hub assembly. So again, a little bit different as far as construction is concerned. Here's my 4th clutch hub picture again, simply showing you a comparison of the 68 RFE on the left. So we flip that hub assembly over, is all we've basically done here, versus the 45, 545 RFEs on the right-hand side. Input shafts. Now this is an area that we've had some troubles with on these transmissions. The input shaft, as you can see here, on the 68 RFEs is a taller and physically larger diameter input shaft. The 45s, 545 RFEs, of course, is a smaller shaft. As you can see, we're also pointing out that there's a difference in seal rings on those two. They're using a Torlon seal ring on the 68 RFE, and they're using a Teflon style seal ring on the 45 RFEs. So again, a little bit different as far as the seal rings themselves are physically concerned. Here we're showing you the overdrive shafts. As you can see here, only one set of splines on the 68 RFE. The 45s and 545s, of course, use 2 sets of splines. In this area that we're talking about now, the input shafts, is one of the things that we ran into lots of issues with. Dodge, just like GM and Ford, are having troubles with people putting aftermarket calibrations into their control modules. In other words, modifying engine torque. These transmissions, just like the GMs or the Fords, were designed to handle a certain given amount of torque. If you exceed that torque, what happens is the splines in the bottom of that shaft strip out. So you can see that little teeny weeny set of splines. It's nowhere near as long as the splines in the top of the shaft. Those splines strip out in the clutch drum itself. So my point is, you'll end up with an issue with this thing not wanting to move possibly either direction or only wanting to move one direction depending on how bad the splines are stripped. So bottom line is there are aftermarket shafts that are out there. We've looked at several of them. In fact, we've had actually a couple companies come and display them at the seminars this year for hardened style shafts for the 68 RFE. So again, you're going to want to inspect those shaft splines themselves anytime you have one of these transmissions apart. As you can see, there is a significant differences between obviously the size of those shafts. Reverse and overdrive piston bellville spring going to be physically different between the two. So pretty self-explanatory, 14 fingers versus 8 fingers there. Now let's take a look at the underdrive shaft of the trans. As you can see, there are significant differences here on the underdrive. That top journal that you see on the 45 RFE right below the splines is gone on the 68 RFE. And of course, the diameters are physically different between those two. So again, even though these components may look very similar, again, they are not the same. Your underdrive clutch pack, again, just like we talked about with the other clutch pack a little bit earlier, they've gone to single-sided plates here. The reason for going to single-sided discs is more holding capacity. You get more capacity with obviously the same amount of clutches. So lots of manufacturers have done this, and Chrysler is no different. So we're showing you 10 single-sided discs for the underdrive clutch pack on the left-hand side versus 4 and 4 on the 45, 545 RFEs on the right-hand side. Underdrive and overdrive reaction plates, again, differences between the two. That step is going to be a little bit different, and you're going to find that you have a couple IDs on that. So the 45, 545s have got 2 dimples cut into their reaction plate, and the 68 RFEs only have 1 dimple on theirs. Here we're showing you the reaction plate installed. Okay. So again, nothing razzle-dazzle about that. Overdrive shaft, just like we did with the other shafts, they're physically different. You've got 2 sets of splines on the 45, 545s, 1 set of splines on the 68 RFEs. As you can see, there's also 3 lube holes that we're trying to show you there on the shaft, and the 45 RFEs, 545s use 4 lubrication holes. So a different lube layout. More clutches. Now we're taking a look at the overdrive clutch pack itself. As you can see, we've got 12 single-sided discs on the overdrive clutch pack on the 68 RFE, and you've got 3 plates and 4 discs on the 45, 545s. So again, different clutch pack layout. Overdrive pressure plates, again, nothing different here than we dealt with the other clutches. They are physically a different discs itself between the 68 RFE and the 45, 545s. So again, we're showing you the steps on the plates themselves to help you with identification of those components. Now we're looking at that 68 plate itself. We're saying that plate itself is installed properly when the identification, which you basically have a number on it, is facing up and the step on that plate is facing down. So we're saying that you should see those identification marks as you install the clutch disc. Second clutch pack. This is one of the areas that they actually use the same part numbers. So the 68 RFEs and the 45s, 545s, they're using the same clutch pack part numbers and clutch pack layout for that second clutch pack. So again, as I told you, this is one of the areas that you're going to see is going to be very, very similar because it's the same components themselves. Reverse hubs. The reverse hub on the 45, 545s are a 2-piece hub. The reverse hub on the 68 RFE is a single-piece hub that's all been welded together. So it's basically a 1-piece assembly. The reaction shaft support. As you can see, the reaction shaft support is physically a different size on the 68 RFE, because again, it's going to be handling much more torque out of this transmission. So bottom line, guys, is it is a physically different size support assembly itself. So basically, that stator support assembly is different. Here we're showing you the other end of that support assembly. And as you can see there, the 45 545s has a bushing in it on the right-hand side versus the 68 RFE. They do not run a bushing at the top of that support assembly. Now we're talking about some accumulator springs. As you can see, there is going to be a difference in accumulator springs. The 68 RFE has a different spring tension, so that's what we're showing you there for the second clutch accumulator versus the 45 545 RFEs. Same thing on the overdrive clutch accumulator spring. As you can see, it is a different color code because it's a different spring dimension. So there's a different spring pressure there on that purple spring versus obviously the non-colored spring that you see here. Now we're simply showing you how the layout goes in here and what those two accumulator springs, where they were placed, so that you know exactly where they physically go on this trans. The manual levers are also different. And we talked about the manual levers heavily when we did the 45 RFEs and the 545 RFEs in the seminars a few years ago. Bottom line is you're going to be very, very careful you do not bend that little link that's coming off the end of the manual valve itself. We've had guys do that, and obviously now that repositions the position of the manual valve, which is obviously going to make a very bad day for you. So bottom line is these are different valves between the 45 and the 545 RFEs. You have an extra land on that 68 RFE manual lever, or I should say manual valve, and of course the little pin or lever that sticks up is a different length. Pump covers, even though again they look very, very similar, there is a difference between those two pump covers. As you can see, the amount of protrusion on the left-hand side, lower right-hand picture, is much higher than you had on the 45 545s. They are stamped. That lower left-hand picture shows that Chrysler is stamping all of these so that you can ID which cover you actually have. So the one on the left-hand side says it's a 45 RFE. So if it's a 68 RFE, there obviously would say 68 RFE on that picture. As we talked about earlier, the seal is here versus the seal being in front of the pump like some of the other transmissions. So again, this is no different on the 68 RFE than it was on the 545s and the 45 RFEs, where your seal is actually that cover assembly. Your four-wheel drive adapter. As you can see, the four-wheel drive adapter itself is different because the dimensions are physically different. So bottom line is it is larger, and obviously, as we're saying also, the seal is already installed by the supplier itself. So again, bottom line is there will be some physical differences between those. So you're not going to be able to interchange those adapters because obviously the output shafts are different sizes. Here's my extension housing. As you can see, the left-hand pictures are the 68 RFEs. The right-hand pictures of the 45 RFEs, 545 RFEs, going to be physically a different extension housing from one transmission to the other. Torque converter, same way here. As you can see, we got more lugs on the 68 RFE torque converter because again, it's going to be going behind higher torque engines. Again, so there's a difference in the converters themselves, not only in the number of lugs, but also the dimensions of the converter. That converter of the 68 RFE is a little bit over 12 inches in diameter. The 45 545 RFEs is 10.7 inches. The other difference you're going to see on the converters, if we flip the converters over the other direction, you're going to see there are 4 lugs on the converter itself for the 68 RFEs, and there are only 2 lugs on the 45 545 transmissions. So again, you're going to be able to ID that converter immediately by simply taking a look at one side of the converter or the other side of the converter and looking for either the number of bolt holes that you're going to have versus obviously the number of lugs that you have to drive the pump with. Cooler fittings are also a little bit different. So even though the cooler fittings themselves are in familiar locations, they're physically a different fitting from one case to the other. As you can see, the 68 RFE, uses an O-ring seal to seal it, which is a heck of a good idea. The 45 RFEs and 545 RFEs simply use a pipe thread. So bottom line is a standard old style pipe thread fitting that you're going to have on the right hand side. And of course the dimensions of these fittings are physically different. So they're not going to interchange no matter what you did. Well, that pretty well concludes our presentation for today. I hope you guys have enjoyed yourselves. Lance, do we have any questions that popped up?
No, everybody looks like everybody's happy. If anybody has any questions, now would be a great time to ask those, and we can get those answered for you. Stevie Valley mentioned earlier that Northland Transmission makes a line pressure tool, so I responded to that and let everybody see that as well. So
great. Okay. So again, he's saying that Northland Transmission builds a tool to allow you to do the line pressure rather than have to buy it out of Miller.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Again, we would like to thank SEAL Aftermarket Products for sponsoring our webinar today. That really helps with the cost of doing the webinars themselves. Again, I guess we'll see you guys here in a couple weeks. We're going to be doing the LCT 1000 Generation 3, which will be the 2006 through 2010 10.5 version LCT 1000. So we're going to get real detailed into what that transmission is and what you need to know about it, because again, we got 3 different generations of Allisons out there, and it's imperative that you know the difference between the different generations. So we're going to be doing a couple presentations on it. The first one will be in 2 weeks. The second one will be in 4 weeks from now. So again, hope to see you guys at those presentations. When we're obviously all done here today, which we're getting to that point, you're going to find that there's going to be a survey that's going to pop up. Again, we appreciate you guys taking that survey to give us some feedback about what you thought about today's presentation, so we know we're on track. And if you have any ideas of different subjects you'd like to see, we'll gladly entertain those ideas for webinars in the future. So with that said, guys, I appreciate your time, and we'll see you next time. Talk to you later. Okay, Lance, I'll have you close it out on your end.